Good morning, it's Dr. Apiti. Welcome to another video. It's the 26th of May 2022, Thursday, and today I want to get straight into it. The last 3 days I spent giving evidence at the CCMA hearing on the COVID vaccine and an employee's right to refuse the vaccine and the PCR test. Well, it was 3 days of grueling testimony that I was giving. But there were lots of problems, not from my side, but from the judge's side and the organization. They were poorly equipped. Their sound system was terrible. You couldn't hear what the judge was saying because they took an hour to set up the equipment, and then he tried to accuse me of not having my stuff ready. I thought, how very bizarre. Mr. Commissioner, you don't even have your damn equipment in place. You don't have proper equipment. You take 1 hour of my time trying to get your equipment sorted out. So much for him. But the main thing was that I was called as an expert witness, and he seemed to disregard what an expert is, even though I tried to explain to him. And what puzzled me most about this guy, and it explains why so many CCMA cases are being lost in favor of the employers. I was startled when I was giving my evidence as to prove my point from a scientific basis, and he said, "No, I don't want to listen to the science. I'm not a doctor." And I thought that was weird, because you're in a scientific debate and you need to listen to the science. And he became cranky at times. He stopped me midway in my presentation. He was rude, abrasive, and he finally admitted very shamefully that he was cranky, and he apologized. And I thought, how bizarre. Here am I trying to present a point of view and put a cogent argument arguing against the PCR test and the vaccine, and here he goes on huffing and puffing and making a noise. And there was a point when I had to tell him about treatment and explain to him about treatment, and he didn't want to hear it. And that was so crucial in the decision-making process, because if those of you remember, the WHO said that there was no treatment for COVID, and people like myself argued against it and said there was treatment. The difference is that for people who were not treated, they were dying like flies, and that added to the numbers and gave the false impression that COVID was a dangerous disease, whereas I was saying if you treat it early, like so many other doctors in the world, COVID is not a dangerous disease. But he discounted that. He was just totally recalcitrant, and I was quietly shocked. But anyhow, my arguments that I presented was that the PCR test, for one thing, was being asked of by employers of their unvaccinated employees, that they got to do it every two weeks. And I argued that number one, the PCR test is a useless test. The one that they did in 2020 was disregarded by the CDC as ineffective. So all those tests that were done prior in 2020 to 2021 could not be relied upon. So those figures cannot be trusted, of those 5 million deaths, because the tests were incorrect. And secondly, the PCR test, I pointed out to them, is not a test pathognomic of COVID. It does not tell you if somebody has a positive PCR test that they have COVID. It tests for a protein. That protein may be in the RNA of the COVID virus, but it is present in many other RNA, so you cannot tell the exact source. So there's no way of saying if somebody's got a positive test, they are therefore infectious with COVID. That's absolute rubbish, because even Rochelle Walensky, and I've made this point, of the CDC, the irreputable CDC, if I may say so, mentioned that after isolation of 5 days, you don't need to do the PCR test because it remains positive right up until 12 weeks. In other words, Mr. Employer and those lawyers who are defending you there, let me tell you what this means. If you have got no symptoms, you are not infectious, your test will be positive, so it is totally useless. So stop bludgeoning your staff with these tests, because for starters, to ask somebody to constantly go for a test is humiliating. It is punishment. It is costly. You put people under severe stress and anxiety, and They have to be constantly on the edge, wanting what that test would come out. And it is nerve-wracking, and you're doing it for no good purpose, because this PCR test protects nobody, tells you nothing. It is an unfair thing, and I hope the day will come when all these employers who've insisted on PCR will be prosecuted and judged for abusing these individuals, for violating the Nuremberg Code and pushing things up their throat. Did you know that touching somebody against their consent is a violation? And we should still subscribe to it. It's a very good set of principles. Then I also raised the point that the vaxxed and the unvaxxed could both be infectious. And the opposition party, lo and behold, agreed with me, but they said unequally. But they erroneously think, and yes, you lawyers who think that the vaxxed are safer, you're wrong. I presented the evidence that said that the Israeli studies showed that the doubly vaxxed and the boosted had 13 times greater risk of getting reinfected and 27 times greater risk of getting symptomatic infection if you're doubly vaxxed. And I pointed out one study, if you're double vaxxed, you had a double risk of dying from Delta, and if you were triple vaxxed, you had 4 times the risk. And I also pointed out, and I hope you were listening, and I hope you are listening now, because these cranky judges are not listening. They're not listening at all. And I don't know why they call themselves judges. You're supposed to listen. But anyhow, after 6 months, your vaccinated people don't have any vaccine. I pointed that out in a study that showed on 780,000 veterans in the US that the J&J vaccine after 6 months dropped to 13%. Yes, 13%. 13% is no immunity at all. So which means after 6 months, all your vaccine employees have got no immunity. They are more dangerous than the unvaxxed that have been previously infected, because they are open now to frequent virulent strains. And don't think boosters are the answer, because the EU has made it quite clear that if you keep using boosters, as the stupid Bill Gates keeps saying, the man who's got no knowledge of cell biology keeps saying 50 years old must keep getting boosters. This damn fool ought to know every time you give a booster, you are tiring out your natural immune system, and when you tire it out, it will fail to respond. So you got a useless vaccinated person after 6 months who is highly infectious, with decreased immunity, and if it takes boosters like your all proposed boosters, then you'll have absolutely no immunity. We're talking about a strain called Omicron. Omicron is a safe strain. It is totally resistant to this vaccine. So why do you want to subject people to taking a vaccine that doesn't give you protection, but can give you any one of the 1,293 side effects, amongst them being a stroke, death, blindness, paralysis, and severe blood dyscrasias, and sudden cardiac deaths, myocarditis, heart attacks? Did you know that there was an 80% increase in ER emergencies in Scotland due to cardiac problems after the vaccine in the 15 to 44-year-old people in the most productive years of life? So what rubbish is this that you're still pushing an agenda for a vaccine that doesn't work when all the world has changed its mind and has said we will live with COVID? We've got 80% herd immunity. Well, there's so much more I can say, but I was not given the opportunity to speak. And what is an expert? There are no experts in COVID. There are people like me with expertise, and I've got the experience. I've treated over 1,000 pneumonias, and I've gotten them better, which something Kudos couldn't do. My final point is this: if a judge is not prepared to listen to the science and facts in a scientific debate, is unfit. Please stop down. Thank you, Dr. Rapiti.